There's Gozer the dog, and the proton pack, and the PKE meter. Then ended up as if a woodpecker perched on your ear was drilling little holes into your frontal lobe. Making an episode on Ghostbusters and not starting with the sentence, "who you gonna call," shows previously unknown levels of willpower on my part, though of course I've just used it then. Other overused words and sentences that I'm going to use without using are lightning in a bottle, misanthropic, predetermined paranormal party pants, and Gozer the Gozerian good evening. As a duly designated representative of the city, county and state of New York, I order you to cease any and all supernatural activity and return forthwith to your place of origin or the nearest convenient parallel dimension. There is an abundance of low-hanging quote fruit that will be tricky to not repeat ad nauseum when it comes to Ghostbusters, which only goes to highlight the longevity of this long-running franchise. However, lightning in a bottle is a good one to start with, and is perhaps an idiom more suited to the original 1984 Ghostbusters movie than any other in film history. This thought is reinforced when witnessing the unfortunately below par attempts at recreating the debutant's soul and wit in the decades since. There have been some zeniths, however unfortunately they have been far more nadirs, and it's the pet peeves I shall be taking you through right now. I'm Mr. Rect, and these are my top 10 pet peeves for Ghostbusters. Number 1. Outdated humour. A large number of movies from last century, especially edgy comedies, will have a mention of outdated humour at the beginning of the film, and Ghostbusters, as a vehicle for a number of Saturday Night Live performers, is obviously a movie counted as one of them. The bulk of the umbrage taken when referring to the Ghostbusters movies refers to Peter Venkman's treatment of women and the awkward sexualisation of Sigourney Weaver's character Dana when possessed, which bring up many issues regarding consent. It is obviously anachronistic, and with it being from a certain time period, it can only push the comedic boundaries that existed at the time it was made. That is, of course, one of comedy's main mission statements, and is why comedy and comedians run a very risky tightrope. Comedies and comedians are often assigned with the task of pushing the edges of social norms for comedic benefit, and when viewed with decades separating them from posterity, when the pendulum of social norms have finished stretching or contracting and begun swinging in the other direction, as society is wont to do, these comments or lines will be viewed through a prism constructed by the social norms of contemporary time periods rather than the prism of the era that the film was made, and can lead to history condemning those whose careers depend on them doing things that they were employed to do specifically at the time. However, when compared to other 80s contemporaries, like another Aykroyd vehicle, Trading Places for instance, the 1984 and 89 Ghostbusters movies can't really be viewed as egregiously offensive. Seriously, have you watched Trading Places recently? Because geez Louise, talk about pushing boundaries, does that movie skirt close to the bone or what? Anyway, back to Ghostbusters and insults, which leads me perfectly to Number 2. Ernie Hudson's sidelining. Perhaps the literal incarnation of token minority casting, the lack of impact that Hudson's Winston Zeddemore has on both Ghostbusters 1 and 2 is egregious to the point of insult. In one scene in Ghostbusters 2, Hudson is literally cut out halfway through. The filmmakers would point to a quick shot with him in the background, assisting people to clear the courtroom. However, it simply looks like exactly what it is, a character that makes up 25% of the team, yet has about 2% of the writing time spent on him. It's agenda-driven filmmaking, yet so poorly executed that they came across as more exclusionist than if they had just gone with a central trio instead of a quartet from the off. Number 3. Ghostbusters 2, a retread of 1. Imitation is the highest form of flattery, however ripping off your own work invokes a different adage, that of familiarity breeding contempt. The Force Awakens had the luxury of decades of time, and the nous to change proceedings enough to seem at least somewhat original to tertiary viewers. Ghostbusters 2 had and did neither of these. Waiting an odd amount of time, 5 years, the 1989 sequel was released too late to ride the hype of the original, but too early that rehashing the first movie wouldn't fly with how fresh it was in audiences' minds. The second sin of copying and pasting the 1984 film's narrative is apparent very soon into its runtime, with Sigourney Weaver's character shoehorned in with incidental and contrived randomness. The behind-the-scenes trouble with the 89 sequel is well known, with the half-a-decade gap down to some of the core cast reticent to return, poor test audience reactions leading to a lot of reshoots, and too short of time allotted for pre-production leading to an unfinished script. To this day, a lot of die-hard fans can't see the wood for the trees when contemplating the follow-up, stating that just spending time in the company of this fan favourite foursome is worth the price of admission alone. But even the most casual of viewers can count the beats it replicates from the first film and become irritated at the cash grab nature of it. It was actually the cartoon, the real Ghostbusters, that gained enough traction to get the sequel made, and that brings me on to number 4. Ghostbusters 2, missing the charm of the cartoon. The 1989 movie, despite its rehashed tag, ended up being a good earner for Columbia Pictures with a $229 million box office return off a $30 million budget. A large part of the sequel movie's creation was down to the real Ghostbusters cartoon's popularity, which assisted in fueling the production of the second film. Released in 1986, it introduced many facets of the franchise that are well known today. Many children of the 80s still hold the cartoon in the highest of regard, and its influence on the live-action big screen product is very evident. For instance, Slimer, originally having the nomenclature of Onion Head and the Mean Green Ghost, was a tiny presence in the 84 original movie, however became an expanded character in the cartoon, and then a large part of the comedic relief in the 89 sequel. Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis worked hard on the moral and existential issues of negative human emotions, manifested in the form of a river of slime running under the streets of New York. These facets of the movie's scriptwriting would have probably been effort better spent on the comedy and characters, as reception on its release were unfavourable, with its shortcomings being highlighted globally. The release date was another hindrance to its success, with 1989 famous for its blockbuster lineup. A mediocre Ghostbusters sequel was going toe-to-toe with Tim Burton's industry-changing Batman, the also industry-changing Die Hard, the Indiana Jones trilogy capper The Last Crusade, Back to the Future's direct sequel, and Star Trek V, along with other fan favourites like The Burbs, K9, Parenthood, Bond's License to Kill, Twister, Lethal Weapon 2, and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. The list is even longer, however. In summary, any movies released in 1989 needed to be of absolute top quality to take a decent slice of the financial pie and a large place in audiences' hearts, with mostly the fanatical Ghostbusters zealots propping up the viewing figures, with the film's box office down $70 million on its predecessor. If more efforts had been taken to include more of the real Ghostbusters cartoon facets and charm, one wonders whether the movie would have been received more favourably. Number 5. The 2016 Backlash. Bring on the comments, but the Paul Feig SNL starring vehicle isn't that bad a film. Perception is subjective, of course, but many would say it's actually better than the 89's Ghostbusters 2, a belief highlighted by the brilliant podcast The Weekly Planet. However, whether the movie is the best or the worst thing Hollywood has ever produced, the vitriol that was created online between the news that the titular 4 had been gender swapped to the movie's release in July July of 2016, and, well, to this day, let's face it, was wildly out of order and viewed by many as rather childish. So much so that surely those involved must look back in hindsight and cringe. So the hyperbole about wokeness destroying their beloved franchise was wildly misplaced. Number 6. The 2016 movie's lack of comedy. I said the movie isn't the worst thing ever created, I didn't say it was the best. And for a comedy franchise led by 4 comedians at the top of their game, and a creator responsible for some of the funniest and most biting Hollywood products of the 2000s and 2010s, there is a startling lack of laughs to be had with this film, lacking the biting wit of A Simple Favor and the popular cult TV show Freaks and Geeks, or the laugh-out-loud qualities of his creations like Bridesmaids and Spy. Feig's talents were suspiciously absent from the bulk of this entry into his oeuvre. With that very same back catalogue, Feig seemed to be the perfect choice for a female-led reboot. However, for whatever reasons, his previous efforts did not translate well to sci-fi comedy fare. He had already dipped his toe into action territory with 2015's Spy, so Sony Pictures would have had supreme confidence that the filmmaker could deliver. Yet, with the exception of a couple of genuinely hilarious factors, mainly from Marvel alum Chris Hemsworth, on a comedy level, the movie doesn't deliver. Number 7. Ghostbusters 2016 left out of the box set. Despite umbrage taken from all quarters for the second sequel/reboot, its exclusion from the box set released by Sony Pictures did not go unnoticed, and actually created a not insignificant swell of fan-based ire and a retrospective outpouring of respect for the previously not well-received reboot. The movie's omission spoke louder than words, and Paul Feig wasn't having any of it, calling out Sony Pictures on social media and receiving support from many quadrants. If Sony made a 200 IQ move by creating support and retroactive fondness for the SNL-led quartet, then they completed their mission with honours. However, one can't help believing that Sony Pictures don't quite have that level of foresight or perception, certainly not after the Sony email leaks, along with just about every non-animated movie set in the Spider-Man universe, which made them look like Mickey Mouse chumps. Number 8. Ghostbusters Afterlife Tempo. Considered and deliberate filmmaking, a facet of 70s cinema severely lacking today, and movies that employ this, when executed well, are to be commended. Building tension and spending time with characters to develop them in dramas is important, and even in comedies, fleshing out the core cast, as well as tertiary members of an ensemble, is a facet of movies and TV that is both salient and necessary to create an emotional thread between the audience and the people they are witnessing this universe through. However, a sequel to a fast-paced and fast-talking beloved comedy really isn't the time or place to use such techniques when an audience is frothing at the mouth for their comedy and nostalgia kicks. The oddly slow and contemplative approach taken for parts of the 2021 movie can be explained somewhat when understanding that it was the director's father, Ivan Reitman, who made the first 2 movies that he is handling with such care and reverence. Perhaps this love was channeled with a slight naivety in hindsight, with more time spent on comedy a preference should the talented younger Reitman be honest with himself. Either way, he is hoping for a more comedic affair when the 5th movie joins the franchise. Number 9. Member Berry's ubiquity, Ghostbusters Afterlife. Speaking of nostalgia, there is a line for this type of thing that, when crossed, opens a movie or TV show to poor reviews and unironic laughter. Indiana Jones crossed the line with one too many knowing close-ups of Jones's fedora and whip in 2023's Dial of Destiny, and Star Wars crosses the line with every new product they release. Ghostbusters Afterlife may take the biscuits with overly gratuitous reference and reverence when referring to its own oeuvre of this now 4 decades old franchise. There's the car, there's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, but it's allowed because it's a small version of him. There's Gozer the dog, and the proton pack, and the PKE meter, all shot with 16 lights and sumptuously slow tracking shots. Pretty much around every corner was another self-reverential Easter egg, which no doubt spiraled long-term fans into a state of absolute arousal. However, for the more casual viewer, smacked of self-congratulatory adoration and got irritating by the halfway mark, then ended up as if a woodpecker perched on your ear was drilling little holes into your frontal lobe. And speaking of long-term fans, number 10. Toxic fandom. Star Wars is held up as the poster boy for the middle-aged children who adore a franchise to unsettling degrees, ready to die on a mound at any moment should their beloved franchise, that they had zero input in actually constructing, be slighted by anyone at any point. However, Ghostbusters must be up there with the most toxic of fandoms that exist today, and really is a blight on an otherwise light-hearted and fun franchise. Anyone who refers to Ghostbusters in anything other than glowing respect can expect a cavalcade of hating reactions. I'm currently researching nuclear bunkers. This is both a shame and antithetical to the breezy tone of the series. The first movie really was an Anchorman type of lightning in a bottle moment, and exploding that into a money-making franchise takes a lot of work, so the fact that these are still going strong is something fans should cherish. However, most sequels have been mediocre, with some bright spots at best, and even the most strident of fans should be able to recognise the shortcomings that pepper the franchise. That being said, there's enough laughs to be had here, and the future is bright for these busters of ghosts. And when searching for the perfect outro, who you gonna call?